New forms and technological innovation could be used in Austrian and German Biedermeier, the Biedermeier style, Biedermeier. This was furniture made from the early 1820s through the 1860s. Simple, large forms that emphasize horizontal and vertical lines, as well as geometric shapes, circles, ovals, and squares were produced. The D shape of earlier Louis XV and later Regency styles was applied. The writing cabinet, featured here in Johann Decker's room in the apartment of the Duchess Sophie in Bleuerhof in Luxembourg, Vienna, shows the attention given to hardwood veneers and polished surfaces. Shapes and surfaces tend to be single and plain, and easily identified with the upper middle-class clientele. Decker was also a respected court artist. This gouache and water color drawing is a Zimmerbild, Zimmerbilder, a room image, usually commissioned as a private gift, preserved usually in European royal collections. These were kept as albums, and they were passed down through royal inheritance. They were very popular in the period 1800 to about 1855. Private domestic interiors, as they are remembered from a certain point in time, evoked the memory of expectation, to memorialize a family member who died, to serve as a souvenir for a child who married and moved away, or as a form of personal diary. A retrospective portrait was common. The souvenirs of mirrored memory of life lived in the past were very often reproduced. Both provide with special drawings and secret compartments in these particular forms of Biedermeier furniture. We also see one here, which is reproduced in your book. Both of these actually provide special drawers, as you can see, and secret compartments, drawers below, compartments above. We find that they have clean, simple, monumental shapes. These are for personal comfort. The veneer was very important. The sheen color, the structure, these were a separate decorative element. Large pattern wood surfaces were important. Applique, carving, inlays were very often avoided. The thinner cuttings and newer methods of wrapping fine layers over the blank wood core were more pronounced in Biedermeier furniture. We see rounded, bulging forms, for example, with very tight surfaces. The boards were cut for frames and fillings and braced against one another, a stable, expansive restrained structure that prevented the veneer from shifting. The wood sheets covered pieces in vertical axes. Fine-grained cherry and mahogany and sometimes pear wood were very common. In the 1820s and 30s, walnut was enhanced with black stain for a lively pattern. The shimmering surfaces of birch, maple, ash were important. Very hard woods, which were sometimes difficult to saw. In France, we find that the classical style was pervasive. During the late 18th century, particularly in the style of Louis XVI, and then during the Napoleonic reign, Napoleon's architects, Percier and Fontaine, established an empire style in the first decade of the 19th century, which was very popular. And so we see that style pervasive through the Restoration as well. The revival of some of the 18th century fine furniture traditions, particularly the use of very fine veneers. In this piece by Francois Baudry, a gondola style bed, showing also the Roman combination of Roman and Empire style. We see that the use of amaranth and lemonwood veneers, and you can see very fine fittings of the veneers were popular during the new century. And so we find this perpetuated into the next, through the next period in French history, particularly the Empire, the French Empire, which started in 1850 and went until 1869. So we see very fine pieces of tuft furniture, tuft and damask, stuffed. We see gilded, very fine gilded carved frames, wood legs, and in this particular case, three pieces, three small couches, chairs, which have actually been attached to each other to promote conversation, tete-a-tete conversing among people. In the apartments of the Emperor Louis Napoleon, and you can see the red and gold gilding, which were very prominent. And here's another view of these pieces. So in England, we also see the classical style in the early 18th century. And really, there was a new revival of pattern books and magazines devoted to the display of decorative patterns, especially from the past. One of the most famous ones, in fact, one that was inspired by the French example created by Percier and Fontaine, is this collection by Thomas Hope. And Thomas Hope actually provided here a large compendium showing the different variations of this style. Thomas Hope, who would eventually represent the Regency style, a classical style of late George III and George IV in England in the 1810s and 20s. And so we see Ackerman's Repository of the Arts, the first magazine dedicated to the decorative arts in England in the 1810s. And this is an illustration from Ackerman's Repository. And we can see this reclining patent chair, hand-colored illustration from Ackerman's, dating from about 1813. And you can see that it's in the Egyptian style. Then we conclude this section in the Regency style. This is John Nash, the Royal Pavilion at Brighton, the dining room. And so we can see both a fusion of classical taste with Chinese, chinoiserie. We also see Indian, so a combination of Eastern decorative styles and motifs in this elegant and elaborate architecture. And it's interesting to note, as we'll see, that that in England, particularly, we find that the royal family will actually lead the way in promoting new styles, particularly the emphasis on Renaissance and medieval style in the 1840s and 1850s. When we come to typography, we have some examples late in the chapter. We see Vincent Figgins, 6-line pica number 1, fat face, cast type and matrices from a specimen book that was published in London in 1821. The idea of larger and fatter letters began in the late 18th century and grew in influence in the early 19th. Thomas Cottrell, Cotterell, produced large and bold letters in the 1770s. Handbills and broadside typesetters worked on a much smaller scale, and the type for books was predominant at that time. And we also see here another work. This is William Thorogood's work. 6-line pica Egyptian slab serif from a specimen book from about London 1821, the same time. Robert Thorne developed fat faces In the first decade of the 19th century, there was a Roman face with increased contrast and weight by expanding the thickness of heavy strokes. His Fan Street Foundry set the tone, along with William Caslin IV and Vincent Figgins, samples from the Fan Street Foundry upon Thorne's death. Figgins established his own type foundry, a Tuscan style with serifs and extended curves. The modern style, Romans, and the new jobbing styles in the 1800s and 1820s became prominent. We find short ascenders and descenders. And in 1815, we find antiques, bracketed and tapering serifs, which make the letters look compact. They contrast between thick and thin strokes. Horizontal anchoring